Hello, Tabernacle family. Good to be with you again for another midweek message. Today we're in James 4. Really, this text goes from verse 1 up through verse 10. You could probably run it a little bit later, even to verse 12. But for us today, we're just going to take the first three verses. And while you're turning there to James 4, I'll give you a few announcements. First one being the Walk for Life. We've talked about this for some time now, and I know a number of you are really excited about it. I know I am, my family is. We're all going to be going out on Saturday, walking around one of the local parks, hitting some of the trails. And, we got the blue shirt to boot, so that's pretty cool. And you guys can wear some bling as well and kind of represent. I know some of the people that have been talking to me have chose not to do it on Saturday, but to do it on a different day. Fine, that's not a big problem. What we're trying to do is really support some good friends here in the community so that they can do a good work for saving a life in our midst. And so if you're still interested in the Walk for Life, then go ahead and look it up online, CareNet. If you want to call into the office, we can give you some more details about that. Or if you want to talk to Pam, she can help you out with that as well. So Walk for Life. Next announcement has to do with Sunday. We have been talking about for some time bringing back our children's services. And so it's another good step in that direction. And the way these ministries work, it's a lot like launching a new ministry time and again. Maybe in your mind it's just kind of like flipping a switch, but there's a lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes. And so a big shout out to all of those that have made that possible. Praise the Lord for all of you. What that means for you, though, if you have a child, third grade or younger, then by all means, bring your family out on Sunday. We'd love to see you again. We'd love to see your kids again. We want to minister to your whole family, and we've got teachers for your class. So 0 to 2 years old, you don't have to wear a mask. If you're in that pre-K and K kind of category, so like ages 3, 4, and 5, you would have to wear a mask to class. Once you're in class, if you're socially distanced, you can take that mask down. And same thing with our first, second, and third graders. We have a class for you as well. So there's our kids ministries. And then one more thing, annually we have this trunk and treat celebration, this gospel witness that we try to do. And look, I'm the first to acknowledge that Halloween is really not a holiday that has a whole lot to do with Jesus Christ, at least how it's expressed right now in our particular milieu. Nonetheless, it is a holiday that has a whole lot of people that are willing to come right out here to our premises. And we really want to make use of that with gospel propagation. We want to be able to take God's words and just meet people where they're at. And in so doing, we have a couple of caveats this year. Here's the first thing. Look, I know I've read the CDC, maybe you have as well. We're a little bit at odds with what the CDC has stated in doing this. I get that. I also understand that throughout this whole time, we have chosen to follow local guidance a little bit more than what we see on the national level. And so the state is not necessarily on the same page as CDC on this. And so just to make doubly sure, we've called in to some of our local authorities, the Behavioral and Health Department, and they have not forbidden us from doing this. And so they understand what we're doing. I do have to say it this way, though. We're moving forward on October 31st with Trunk and Treat, but we're doing so provisionally. And here's why I say that. We are seemingly beginning to enter a time in which we need to start taking this stuff almost week by week again, right? We got some hot spots down in the city, and so we want to be wise with how we proceed. So all that to say, right now, mark it on your calendars, October 31st. We'll have some info on the church website coming up. Start buying some candy, start getting your costume ready. Have a costume that has a little bit more to do with godliness than with ungodliness, right? And so try to avoid the blood and fangs and all that kind of business. And maybe come out with something a little more like Legos or M&Ms. You'll understand what that means. And if you don't, feel free to call me. We'll help you out with it, okay? So there you go. 3 announcements for you. Have you turned to James 4? That in mind, there are a number of congregations that have this idea of passing the peace. Sometimes you'll see it in a little bit more of a formal liturgy, and people will go around shaking each other's hand, peace of Christ to you, and you'll answer back, no, peace of Christ to you. Oh, praise God. Sometimes if you're in maybe sort of a low church setting, like a Baptist church or something like that, people just go around and you'll have this official greeting time, and people go around, shake everybody's hands. And sometimes that's great. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it. Sometimes maybe it's a little cheesy and artificial. Sometimes, doggone, it's awful. And so what happens is people will go around the church, and there's certain people you won't make eye contact with because you got some kind of beef going on, right? Or there's people that come by and you're like, I don't want to shake their hand, and you have this very much not piece of Christ thing that's going on. You'll probably notice in our church we don't do that. The goal is we kind of want to just have an authentic greeting of each other, right? That when you see people, you really do wish them the peace of Christ, that you do spend some time praying with them. And if there's somebody here at church that when you walk by, you won't make eye contact, may I say that's a real problem? That here we are, a bunch of sinners in the same building. It wouldn't be surprising if there were some measure of conflict here, if there were some measure of fighting that happened. A lot of times people say, I wish that we could just have church like they did in the first century. And sometimes I think, be careful what you wish for. As you read a text like this, let me remind you of some things that James has already said. He's given a really strong warning already about anger, that you should be slow to speak, slow to anger, quick to hear. And so people think, well, probably what's happening is you had a lot of people that were quick to anger. We just got done with chapter 3, talking about not many of you should be teachers. Well, why not? Seems like there was a whole lot of selfish ambition going on. That's a political term, remember? And that there was a whole lot of wisdom that was not from above, but frankly satanic. And so now he comes to chapter 4, and he asks this as his topic sentence. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Whoa, hold on. And so some people take that among you in a couple of different ways. Literally, the Greek reads, among your members. So is it the members of the church that are fighting and quarreling with each other? Well, maybe. We'll get to that among you a little bit more in a moment. But let's first take those words, these quarrels and these fights. The first word, you could translate it wars. It's armed conflict. Is that a metaphor or not? And again, you'll find kind of a division of opinion on here. Some of the people would have been zealots. That's a political party. Think cloak and dagger. Think Jesuits. Think we really hate Rome because they've oppressed us, so let's kill the Roman governor. Think that kind of stuff, right? And they're thinking, well, some of these people got saved and they're in the church, and maybe when James says just in a minute, it leads to murder. Maybe there was a real situation like that in the church where this really was flesh and blood, murder and armed conflict. Let's not suppose that Christians are immune to that kind of stuff. You don't have to think too far back in church history to the Reformation, where you have like a third of countries that lose their population, sometimes by some estimates up to a half of a given nation. That's really awful, right? By the way, everybody claiming to be Christians. Man, that's really an awful price. Okay, so in our church, by God's grace, that hasn't happened yet, has it? Good job. Keep up the good work. Sell your sword. You don't need to bring your sword to church on Monday or Sunday, pardon me. But where does all this conflict come from? Let's say that it is metaphorical. You have armed and unarmed conflict. The word here is polemics, right? So you're polemics. You're having all of this sharp discourse. Well, and he gives you an answer. Is it not that your passions are at war within you? Passion, you could translate that pleasure. Your pleasures are at war within you. Sometimes I give you some Greek words. This one helps out. Hedonism, right? So the word is hedon or hedonon. So really strange that James is saying, you want to find the source of all these quarrels, all this bickering, all the fist fighting, all the swords, all the wars and warlike words. It's from within you. And here I take it to mean not so much member against member, but within you, like the members of your body, right? Your body itself. So the Apostle Paul will talk about the lust of the flesh, right? Or James 1, he says, where does all of this temptation come from? Don't say when you're tempted that you're tempted of God. That's not the source. But rather you are snared, you're led away, you're enticed by your own lust. Different word, epithumia. So real similar, I understand, but right now James is talking about your hedonistic impulse. Well, that's interesting. What do you want? What are those things, these hedonistic longings where you're saying, I just want something to satisfy my soul. Uh, and maybe you could see this in a lot of different realms. Okay, here's a few common ones, and you might have something different. It's not exhaustive. If you're thinking of maybe a materialistic longing, I don't mean philosophical stuff here. What I mean is just you really like things, all right? And so for you, maybe it's that new car. Man, I just want this certain car and I want it now. Okay, why? And what kind? And how does that work with your budget? And what does this say about your priority structure? Or I want this new house, or within my house, I want this new thing with my house. Okay, and again, remember, money is not good, money is not bad. Money is just a God given resource that should be used to accomplish God given goals. So, how are you being a steward of that God given resource? Materialism is a real thing. I mean, are you constantly finding that, man, I would feel better if I went shopping. Man, you hit that little button and you're like, oh, that's so cool. You get sort of that shopper's euphoria going on right there, only to be met with buyer's remorse the next day. What is it that drives you to that? Is this just an escape mechanism for you? I mean, materialism's a real thing. Maybe for you, it's not so much I need to buy something, it's this sensual impulse. And for you, that could be a sexual outlet. It could be maybe stopping short of that particular release, and it's just a sensuality. Your eyes wander. It's this lust of the flesh, and you're always looking, never satisfied, right? All the rivers run into the ocean, yet it is not full. And so you look yet again on that website. You look yet again in that magazine, and you get this kind of high, but it's not really high. It doesn't feel right, but here you go, like a dog to its vomit. You're back again. Well, what are you doing with all this sensuality? Why is that? And again, is it your escape? Why is that what's driving you with all this? Maybe for you that's not it. Maybe it's this corporate climbing, right? You're in the rat race, and you're really trying your career. By the word that word career has a lot to do with like careening, right? Careening around the racetrack. That's why you call it the rat race. And so here you are pursuing your career, just round and round and round again, climbing the corporate ladder. I got to do this thing. I got to please my boss. I got to do this. And there's a sense in which there are obligations at work. I know that as well as the next guy. There's a different sense, though, that maybe some of those so called obligations are self imposed. There's a sense in which, you know, you may have this performance based theory of self worth. That if you can just hit the next rung on the ladder, then you'll have the approval of those really important people in your life. Well, why? Why? Maybe you could talk about social peacocking. Sometimes you see a lot of this on social media. It doesn't have to be social media, it can be anywhere. But your desire just to look good. Guys, all of this stuff, I said it's not exhaustive. Obviously, you can fill in the blanks. Maybe one or more of these apply to you. Maybe something else applies to you. But at root, it's kind of hedonistic, isn't it? Where you do this because you're driven by pleasure. Okay, so now back to wars and rumors of wars, right? These quarrels and fights that are happening between you and the people around you. Think, is it not pleasure driven? Maybe for you it's family, right? If you hadn't treated my family this way, then I would treat you differently. Well, man, I get such pleasure when people regard my family in a certain way. With all of this, where's the cross of Christ? Where does the blood of Jesus Christ come in with any of this stuff? Has it not been life according to me, writ large, kind of like Gideon when he wipes out at the end of his life? Well, those are sad things. Well, let's take another verse here, right? Is it not your passions that are at war within you? You desire, so different word. Now we're not talking so much about hedonism. This is that epithumia. This is the word James used in chapter 1 when we're led away by our own lust. And that is this just not only desire, but this strong desire. You desire and you don't have. So what do? Murder. You covet. And the word here has to do with zeal. You have this hot, burning, hot desire, this zealous pursuit thereof. You covet. and you can't obtain. So again, you fight and you quarrel, you have this frustration. Well, you think about desire. Well, by its very definition, it's not realized. You lust. Okay. You lust for things you don't have. And you covet that which you are trying, actively trying to get, but you can't obtain it. So what do you do? I mean, this is pretty challenging. I think back to a couple of important writers from the last century. George Orwell would have been one. You might think 1984, Animal Farm, things along these lines. And his real fear is that we'd have this totalitarian state. I mean, Big Brother is watching, right? That you just be externally controlled, and books would be banned. You can't do that. Cancel culture would come in. Maybe you see some snippets of that going on around us right now, but there's another writer, Huxley. He writes Brave New World. You might be more familiar with Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. So Huxley posits a really different thing. It's not so much this external control, but it's internal. And that the real way that society would meet its demise, or better yet, be controlled, is because you do so through bread and circuses, right? If I can use that Roman kind of picture, you just amuse yourself to death. And so this is maybe more along the lines of what James is talking about, where you are just amused. Well, amusement, right? It's without thought. You're now kind of distracted away from that which is truly good to that which is some lesser form, probably of good, but it's a good thing wanted wrongly, isn't it? And so because of this, boy, you're really off base. Okay, so in life we know there's a lot of things you don't have. So then James turns to that as he continues. Well, you don't have. So what? This is verse 2, part C, portion C. You do not have because you do not ask. Well, that was simple. I mean, ask and you shall receive, right? Seek and you shall find. Knock, the door shall be open. Jesus told you that. If you ask anything in my name, you'll get it. Jesus told you that. I mean, he's not lying to you. He's telling you the truth. He's the good God. Every perfect gift comes from above, from the Father of lights. That's in the Bible too, right? So you ask, but you don't have. So think about why don't you have? I think I quoted a little bit later in the verse, pardon me there. And James' first point is, well, you don't have because you haven't asked for it. So here we are, busy sinning to try to gain something. And James says, are you a Christian or are you not? Remember, the whole book is tests of a living faith, faith that works. Well, if you're a Christian, then you are someone who prays. If you're not someone who prays, odds are you're not a Christian. Maybe you are a Christian, but you're not praying because, again, your theology's off. And you think, man, I just need to clean myself up before I pray. I've sinned in maybe one of those four categories that I mentioned earlier. Here I am buying more than I need. Here I am essentially giving myself away again. And so I just don't feel like I can pray right now because of your guilt or because of your distraction. You have not prayed. Look, there's no time like the present. Probably those times you least feel like praying are the times you most ought to pray. Good grief. Pause the video right now and pray. Like, why would you not pray? So you have not because you asked not. But some of you have asked and you're still not receiving it. Well, why? Probably because you ask in terms of manipulation, not in terms of real repentance. God, please bless me in ways that I want to be blessed, which probably mean a whole lot more like, oh Lord, please fulfill my lust. Well, that's not God glorifying. What if you prayed like this? Father, I long to glorify your name. I'm praying for the salvation of my neighbor, friend, family. Lord, here's this hard situation at work. It's been a rough time with the boss, the coworker, with the busyness thereof. Help me to glorify you. Give me this spirit of Daniel. Give me this spirit like Joseph had. Well, those are good prayers. Lord, it's been so hard, finding some peace with this person that I'm with. Please help me to show them what your grace looks like. Man, those are good prayers. Those are good prayers. Well, then he comes to this last verse here, and he says, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions, your pleasures, your lusts, your strong desires. I think I want to just pause and think about pleasure for a minute, before we sign off for this particular message. You read a text like this, and if you're not careful, pleasure gets a bad name. Well, therefore, you have this idea that to follow Christ is to live this dour existence, the life sucking on lemons. That's really not what it's all about. I mean, pleasure is a marvelous thing. Psalm 16:11. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. What about this one? Taste and see that the Lord is good. What about this one? Delight yourself also in the Lord. He'll give you the desires of your heart. We could say a lot more verses, right? Think about this. God created us, why? For his own good pleasure. Read Ephesians 1. And you are made in the image of God. Accordingly, God gave you desires and pleasures, and those are God-given things. Let me read something to you. This is from C.S. Lewis. If you haven't read Screwtape Letters, you owe it to yourself to read it. It's kind of a fun book, and the premise is you have this sort of a higher-ranking demon, and he's teaching these younger demons how to persuade Christians into sin, how to tempt them well. And so, at one point, this senior devil is saying to Wormwood. Wormwood's like the tempter in training here, the demon in training. He says this quote: "Never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground, the enemy being God himself. I know we have won many a soul through pleasure. All the same, it is his invention, not ours. He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. All we can do is encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced at times, or in ways, or in degrees which he has forbidden. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural." Boy, think about sensual pleasure on that one, huh? "An ever increasing craving for an ever diminishing pleasure." That's the formula. It's funny. We understand that when it comes to like drug addiction or substance abuse, it happens all around us. Here's another one. We'll cite Blaise Pascal. And so Blaise tells it like this: "All men seek happiness. That's without exception. Whatever different means they employ, they all tend to this end. The cause of some going to war and of others avoiding it, it's the same desire in both, attended with different views. The will never takes the least step but to this object, namely pleasure. This is the motive of every action of every man, even of those who hang themselves." So, what kind of pleasure are you seeking? Let me give you one more here. This is Bernard of Clairvaux. It says, "We taste thee, O thou living bread, and long to feast upon thee still. We drink of thee, the fountainhead, and thirst our souls from thee to fill." So may you find your satisfaction